Good evening, everybody. I welcome you all in today's webinar series. And it's a great pleasure for all of you to welcome in this web platform for dialogue. I'm Dr. Swati Chakraborty, platform moderator. And our today's eminent speaker is Viktoria Ivanchenko. She is an analyst at the Institute of Development of Russian Foreign Policy and Trade Academy and an editor of PICREADI. It's a creative diplomacy website. Victoria is also an expert at the Russian International Affairs Council. Victoria's research interests are public diplomacy, media technologies, integration in Europe and Eurasia, Russia and West relations. Really welcome for today's session. She will, now I hand over the session to her. And I request all of you, if you have some questions, just be patient. After the entire session of her, we will give you the opportunity to speak with her directly, or you can write the questions in the chat box. Yes, Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Swati. It's an honor to join your platform. I hope that my lecture will be informative and interesting for you. I'm going to focus on particular Russian post-Soviet space in their combating COVID-19, as I guess it's one of the most urgent topic now. I will start from that point that today we have a holiday. It was postponed. It was 9 May parade, Victory Parade, in the end of European part of the Second World War. And today I could say there is a turning point also in our day-to-day life, because it's the first time when Russia has invited and has met the food. We have delegations from post-Soviet countries. We have also military delegations, by the way, from India, China, Serbia, Mongolia today at the Aba Red Square. It seems like life is already coming back, and we slowly getting back to the normal way of living. But at the same time, I can say that it's some kind of illusion, because still coronavirus hasn't been beaten both in Russia and in other countries of the post-Soviet space. Now we have reached the point when Moscow, I mean the capital of Russia, has almost lifted all restrictions which we had. Now we are allowed to walk, we are allowed to go to cafes. Of course, there's some restrictions with masks and gloves. We are allowed to go to museums, libraries, but everything is regulated by new sanitary rules. And it's more case of one big city, that is Moscow, because in other regions still there are much more restrictions, and we all highly recommended to work from home as well. It is important because in another case we will have overloaded transport system. We will have as well a lot of crowds just in the city. It's now already the case because Moscow is the biggest city of Russia. But at the same time, people tries to maintain the social distancing, in general, to be careful. And personally, I also can say that I have already elaborated some new habits in my behavior, and I don't hurry to meet people because there is still a threat. And because of that, the internal connection inside Russia, I mean transport connection, it is slowly recovering, but still there are a lot of restrictions in trains, in planes. We do not have international transportation now at all because it was fully closed, as well as we have closed borders, especially for foreigners. And now there was a new directive, I can say, that some of Russians can leave country in case they can prove that if it is an important reason. For example, you have to go for some treatment abroad, or you work abroad, study abroad, but at the same time we have very small number of international flights. They are specially organized, and first of all, they're organized to return Russians which have been stuck in other countries. And still there are some Russians who are in some Asian and European countries, most of all Asian countries. And in this case, our government initiated some special measures to support those Russians who stay abroad without their consent, I can say, because of the situation in the world. And of course, government had to initiate a great number of new measures to support people, to support children, even migrants, to support pensioners who are still highly recommended to stay at home, especially if you are above 65. As well, it's a package of help to small and medium business, and I can say that it's really quite sensitive, and you can feel it already, because a lot of small cafes, some small I could say shops, they're already closed, and I'm not sure if they will recover soon. It is quite obvious even in big cities. And of course, some people try to avoid the restrictions during the lockdown, which we had for 2 months. But at the same time, people really, because of the situation, because of the crisis, they do not waste money, I can say. They do not spend that, and now new trends in Russia have emerged about that. At the same time, I can say that during the lockdown and during our new phase of less restrictions, charity has become much more popular, and also the volunteer movement. Special agencies organized the movement, which we are together, and people voluntarily participate in that. They try to help people who have some restrictions. I mean, they cannot leave their houses if they are pensioners, for example, or they're disabled people. Also, it was help with some products, food, and I can say that many social agencies, organizations, NGOs were included in that, and I also participated in the analytical part. I had to watch closely what is going on in Moscow and the regions, and I can say that these trends are quite clear. These trends are quite apparent. And also, Russia had to join the whole, I could say, battle against COVID-19 in the post-Soviet space. It is really another dimension of cooperation here, because first, Russia is a part and the founder of Eurasian Economic Union, and we have really high interconnection between countries of the Union and countries of other post-Soviet space. A lot of people come to Russia to work, to their labor migrants. A lot of people have business here. It's like intercross, I can say, business, international business between, for example, Armenia and Russia, or Azerbaijan and Russia. There are small interpreters, but at the same time, when the COVID-19 began, they all was stuck in a very difficult situation. Some of the people could not cross the border for both directions. Some of the people was just had to wait for a very long time in the airports. There were really big problems and challenges what to do with migrants which got stuck up in the big Moscow airports, because already the borders were closed. But at the same time, they could not go back because flights as well were cancelled. And it was a challenge. Some cafes, some policemen, social organizations tried to help them, to provide some food, clothing, but it also was a juridical question, and it was a question of international level, because here Russia had to cooperate as well with other countries like Armenia, for example, Georgia as well, some Central Asian countries. And the whole situation in post-Soviet Union, I mean, ex-Soviet states, is not that easy. If you follow more close the numbers there, you will see that many countries still face the high level of increasement of numbers. There are some special anti-recordsmen, I can say. Anti-records concern, first of all, such countries now as Armenia, as Kyrgyzstan, for example. Also, there are some bad tendencies in Kazakhstan, in some regions of it. In Azerbaijan, Ukraine also had to renew some of the restrictions. And it's really, it's a challenge because, for example, in Armenia, numbers are like already 20,000 people infected, and at the same time Georgia is less than 1,000, and in comparison you can see that the situation in Armenia is pretty risky. And because of that, Russia also had to send doctors just I guess several days ago to Armenia to help combat COVID-19. And as well, it was a challenge for the Union, Eurasian Economic Union. It consists of 5 countries: Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Sorry, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Belarus. And those countries, they have like not fully open borders. It's not Schengen region, but the border regime is quite light. You don't need visas, you don't need special permissions to work, and so on. And in the time of the beginning of the pandemic, all countries began to close the border without even consent of each other, and it was also some risk of losing the achievements of the Union, for example. And as well, now, after some time already passed, the main bodies of the Union thinks how to combat the virus, the consequences as well, and what they work together on. Now there are trends of more digitalization of economics and of economies, and in the Eurasian Economic Union as well. In Russia, of course, government also saw that we have a very rapid development of online trade. There were no other, ways out, because people had to order everything online. They couldn't go. The lockdown was pretty strict. Of course, there were official fines, checks of policemen, but in fact, it worked in a more lighter way. But again, people were really a little bit scared, and they didn't go for some without any reasons. Just for that, they didn't go too often. When officially it was lifted, then of course much more people began to move through the city. And also, after all these trends, our governments in other countries, they began discussion about distant work, about regulation of that, because people for some time more will definitely work from home, or some of the offices, they offer such type of working as 2 days in the office, 3 at home, or for example 3 in the office and 2 at home. And also social distancing in the offices, and other organizations, they have to be ensured, because again, your risk will appear. Now we don't see, after the lift of the restrictions, any high increasement, but anywhere we have to stay careful. And it's the first and the most important thing, because some people think like the epidemic is already has already left us, but it's not really true. And as well, in other countries, there were a bad situation with that. For example, Ukraine has lifted restriction much more earlier than Russia. Of course, the pandemic there began also earlier, but now there is a throwback. And again, government had to initiate some restrictions and prolonged the adaptive quarantine up to the end of July, for example. It means that the more cautious you are going to be now, the better will be to recover. And as well, we have in the whole, space, post-Soviet space, we have the problem of transparency, because really it is somewhat difficult to compare statistics, because in some cases there is a lack of testing. For example, Russia has one of the highest number of testing in the world, but at the same time, some countries really lack that, and they had to get it from Russia, from China, from some other countries, from European Union, for example. And the real picture is not that obvious. As well, there is also a problem of mismanagement in many countries. It means that they have even capacities, but they cannot govern that in an accurate way. That is why there is some chaos in medical system, in testing, and the rules who should be tested for COVID-19, who should go to the quarantine, who can work from home, and so on. By the way, there is a very interesting case of Belarus. Maybe you follow that. That is one of the rare countries in the world who decided not to initiate quarantine at all. So officially, they still work as and operate as they operated in a normal life, I can say, before the COVID-19. Of course, people understand the threat and they change their behavior, but officially there are no restrictions which were imposed on offices, on people just in the streets, in transport. The main thing that the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, made it was deploying of medical capacities, and Belarus has one of the biggest number of hospitals in the post-Soviet Union space, and really it helped to deal with the beginning of pandemic. And to be honest, he's quite skeptical about the level of threat. The numbers there are pretty high, but at the same time, there is no catastrophic statistics about lethality. And even after the parade they had on May 9 this year, there were no any rapid breakup of the epidemic in the country. So it's just some, I can say, gradual development of the pandemic, not pretty differs from Russia. And that creates much more questions, of course, because some countries had to initiate very strict lockdowns, and in the end it showed better results, but not really a big difference. I guess that, for example, of Georgia, who imposed one of the strictest lockdowns, really it was not allowed even to move between cities. There was special rules that you cannot go out your home in some days or after some evening time, and they have pretty small numbers. Of course, there's still enough critics about the measures that were initiated, that there is not enough help to common people who had to witness big losses. But all in all, they show success in combating, not spreading the virus. And Azerbaijan had to throw back to the restrictions again. Armenia, as I said, have some really bad dynamics, and Central Asian country has a problem of transparency. Of course, they're all different, but there is still a case, for example, of Turkmenistan, which officially claims that they do not have coronavirus at all. So no case like beyond the country without coronavirus. Of course, it creates some suspicions, and there are some gossips that it's just hidden, that they do not show the real situation, and it's a pretty closed country. It's difficult to gain information from there. And the somewhat similar stage was with Tajikistan. For a long period, they claimed they had no coronavirus at all. But before the examination of World Health Organization, they had to admit that they have such problems, and they officially admitted that they have coronavirus in the country. And now it is claimed that they have like more than 5,000 people infected. So they had to admit that the threat exists. And at the same time, Tajikistan did not agree to accept migrants. I mean, Tajikistani migrants from Russia, though most of migrants are in Russia, for example, in some other countries like Kazakhstan. And they keep working in other states. And probably it's some of the measures to create some stability, because Tajikistan really lacks workplaces, and it could create some even disorders. I mean, because people won't have a job, and it will be really a big challenge and problem to cope with. Here, Russia, especially now, when the big projects of buildings and just re-innovation, for example, it's also a Moscow program that continues, and building new apartments and so on, where most of all migrants from other countries, from central countries, work in such spheres. And it still goes on. So Russia has to keep up some stability in the whole space. And as well, Russia had to send aid to all of the post-Soviet countries except Ukraine and Georgia, of course, because the relations are really tense. And that was medical equipment, testing systems, also some protecting equipment, I can say, some things like masks and gloves. And now also Russia has signed an order that those protecting items will be exported abroad, because in the first phase of the epidemic, it was prohibited to export some of the vital items concerning medical sphere, concerning, for example, agriculture. Now it's slowly changing, because the situation is getting stable, and it's also officially approved by the World Health Organization that the whole situation in Russia is getting better. And because of that, the whole even legislation in this sphere is slowly changing. And now, first, I can say, package of measures to support, they were initiated up to the July the 1st. But yesterday, Putin had an official address to the nation, and he offered to prolong many of those measures, especially to families who lost jobs or to children, to prolong them up to the middle of September, so it could help. Of course, some of the support will be already ceased after July, because the business is already slowly opening, so there is no need to support some small and medium business. Of course, there will be some, I guess, revision of the legislation. Some of taxes already cancelled or postponed as well. There is even compensation which will be given, like for the half of the year, I guess, to small interpreters. And is, of course, it's all important both for living, both for milding the situation. I mean, to keep people in order, because of course there is some mistrust. Of course there is a situation of tension in the society, especially for the case of April and May, because the situation was pretty unexplainable, I can say. So people didn't understand what is going on. There were a lot of skeptics about it in Russia, in other countries as well, as I could follow that. And also people really, nobody, the government couldn't predict what's going to be soon, because in the first assessments we had a guess that it would I guess cease in the beginning of May. But in the beginning of May only we had the peak of the infection, and numbers were really high, although we didn't have the situation of the overloaded medicine. But again, really numbers and people who had very intense therapy, number of deaths also increased highly, and people also had some doubts about the real how the numbers are real. And then after that, both World Health Organization in Russia, representative, and Russian government had to explain that such big numbers of the infected people and low numbers of people who died, they depend on the number of testing, because testing is really high. And at the same time, it is like 45% of infected people, those who do not have any symptoms. The number changed. It was like from 40 to 50 people who just do not have any symptoms, but they were tested because, for example, of the contacts with the infected, or they had to be tested because they arrived from other cities, from other countries. And because of that, it was possible to identify a big number of infected people who do not feel bad, I can say. They do not have any symptoms. As well, there were a lot of people who had COVID-19 but couldn't check that in the beginning, like in the end of March, in the beginning of April. To be honest, it's also my case, because I had an antibody test, and because of antibody testing, we now in Russia can check the number of people who were infected, who had coronavirus, but they treated at home without knowing that, just some suspicions. And also already Moscow antibody testing showed that it's like 17%, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, but less than 20% have already immunity. Of course, nobody knows how stable the immunity is and how long it is going to last. But it is obvious that much more people in big cities at all had had to meet COVID-19 personally already, but without knowing that. And of course, it's a problem of testing of statistics, and it's really a challenge when you begin to compare, for example, Russian case to, for example, Kazakhstan case, because absolutely different systems of testing, of statistics. The same story with Belarus, because even in the beginning, even population and people, citizens of Belarus, they were very critical. They were afraid that if there is no quarantine, there will be a catastrophe. Then, all in all, the situation gets more stable, but still there are a lot of agencies, organizations who are quite critical about Belarusian model. It differs from the Swedish model, but it's also was quite risky, of course. And I guess only after some time we will be able to judge, because still Belarus in the situation of not in the middle, but somewhere close to that. I guess we all Russia especially has crossed the medium line, but at the same time there is a risk to throw back to get the previous numbers. And I have also to follow that every day, and I see that sometimes really there are some risks, some long-lasting situations in some countries. I mean, with fighting COVID-19, for example, still St. Petersburg is not, the situation in St. Petersburg is not that clear. It's also a big city, also a lot of migrants, a lot of people coming there, and it's a touristic place. Even now in the time of the pandemic, many people go there. But at the same time, it is not so good managed as Moscow, and some of the numbers they create really some concern. For example, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday numbers of deaths in St. Petersburg were higher than in Moscow. So it means that some measures, of course, should be taken and taken cautiously. Also, there was a situation of some southern regions in Russia which still have high numbers, which still have the dynamic of increasing people infected and deaths as well. It was the case of Dagestan, Republic of Dagestan in Russia, and Moscow doctors had to go there to help. When there was some small, I can say, scandal about that it was not obvious first time, but then of course the government had to deal with that quite quickly. And because of that, because of really big territory of Russia, every region needs its very particular address. I mean that the help, the measures, they have to include many specific regional traits, even customs as well. For example, in Caucasian countries, there was a problem with weddings, with some ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, which led to the increasement of infections. And that is why all the response should be addressed directly to the regions. There are some northern regions in Russia, by the way, which now almost do not have infected people, and it's of course a good dynamic. So let's hope that the coronavirus won't come back, so people just will recover. But at the same time, when the transition all over the country is recovering, getting back almost all trains, directions, and now also Russia already is elaborating the rules of crossing the border and recovering on international flights. And we all understand that it can create new risks, of course. And before the vaccine, or before the enough number of immunized people, at least, and again, there is no confidence that it would work. But anyway, unless we unless we create the vaccine, it's difficult to say about the whole recovery, the whole coming back to the normal life. I think that everybody understands that. But there are also hopes, for example, for good summer weather, that it will help to immunize people or to kill, I can say, virus. Of course, official statements say that no, please be careful, because it doesn't mean anything. But people really, I can see, feel more relaxed about that. And as well, about vaccine, Russia is one of those countries which tries to create a cure to the COVID-19, and we have a big number of really different vaccines examined. But I can't be sure about the level of liberation of the vaccine, because every day we get news like we have new tests of another type of vaccine on animals, and even we now test some of the vaccines on representatives of, for example, medical institutions or Ministry of Defense volunteers. but still there is no evidence about the efficiency of the vaccine, and there is no evidence that it won't have bad consequences, as it usually happens in the time of creating the vaccine. Before, our Ministry of Health said that something like we will have the vaccine by July, but of course it's quite fast to say so. We're still in the process of creating it, and we registered like 4 types of the vaccine for in the World Health Organization, but still examination is needed. And it is very good that the system which existed before, I mean, in the Soviet times, it was quite developed. We have traditions of combating with epidemics, some strict sanitary rules, which were easily to get from the past and to adapt them to the current situation. But at the same time, new time needs new responses, and the problem of coronavirus is that it has a lot of symptoms. It's sometimes it's not tested from the first time. Also, Russian doctors say that's a really big problem, that like even 3 tests cannot show if the person is really infected, and only after some times these tests show that. And or antibody testing could only show that the person was sick. It's also even case from my environment. I know such people who could only prove that they had this COVID-19 because of antibody testing. And this experience that the Soviet Union had and Russia is implementing now, of course, is helping, and it's helping in the scientific institutions and universities, which elaborate as well different types of procurement and testing, and as well the future vaccine. But at the same time, what I think personally, that probably we need more cooperation with other countries. Of course, there are some attempts. There are some attempts to cooperate more, for example, with France and Japan. But together, I guess the way to the vaccine will be much more shorter and more effective. So now is a good time to come back to some more intense scientific cooperation about that. Well, I guess I had enough time to tell everything, and I will be happy if someone has some questions. I will try to respond.
A wonderful explanation, first of all. Thank you so much. Thank you personally.
Thank you.
Uh, Congratulations that today is 24th and it's Russia's day. So it's a very, very precious day for you. So uh, thanks to Wikipedia, I came to know. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, jokes apart. We have a question from Dr. Anirudh Burman. Would like to ask that initially death and contamination rate in China was increasing rapidly. There were no news from Russia initially. Then suddenly a lot of cases occurred in Russia. Now again, we don't hear much. Is it mainly because of the fact that there was a lack of or hardly any testing earlier, and now there is a lot of testing? So it's just because of the rapid test has been increased. So that's why. But how has the death rate been controlled? So that is a very important question. How you are
Mhm.
going to control the death rate? Because in India, it's growing rapidly. Even the death rate also is very high. So what is the measurement that Russian government is taking in a control over the death rate?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I have to make some throwback to the beginning of the pandemic. In January, Russia already had some concern about the situation in China, although we used to think it was going to be a regional case. But in February, Russia closed the border with China, and they the educational, for example, institutions in Russia, they had to provide online education for Chinese students. We have quite a big number of Chinese students here, but they couldn't come, of course, back. And there were like several cases which we had of COVID-19, and most of them were from China. But at the same time, because of lack of testing and almost no testing at the time, there are some versions that some of the eastern regions in Russia have already met the coronavirus before the beginning of pandemic and epidemic in Russia, particularly. Officially, the government says we have the European type of coronavirus, I can say, and the European scenario. So it came from Europe, from Italy, from Spain, and we also had a lot of tourists coming back from those countries. And the epicenter of the epidemic was Moscow, not, for example, some Vladivostok or Khabarovsk. Moscow was the epidemic and really was quite obvious. So I also tend to think that the closure of border was helpful with China, I mean, and at the same time, much more people are going to the Western countries and from regions as well. So the spread of the infection occurred because of the European track, I can say. But I think also that some of the cases were brought by China to Russia, but at the same time, Russian epidemic happened like 2 weeks later than in Italy or in France and Germany. So it is more about European scenario of events.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Victoria. There is, and I think Dr. Aniruddha would like to say something in Russian. So you can see the message in chat box and can reply in Russian. So yes,
Yeah, I see. Thank you.
yes, thank you. So it's wonderful discussions with you, and the entire scenario that how Russian government is actually trying in a wide variety, but in this very big country, and it's literally very, very, very big. So it's not easy to do something fortnight because this virus is very, very dangerous, and the control over this virus has not been so easy. But at the same time, I have a question personally, that what is your analysis that after the COVID, how we can do something together, irrespective of any political identity, irrespective of any religious identity, irrespective of any regional crisis, how we can do something together just to forget about any kind of enemies or misconceptions, conflict. So how can we do together something for the own beneficiary, for the economical development all over the world? So what is your perspective?
Thank you for the question. It's a question for the Nobel Prize, I guess, because really very often it is obvious that much more easier and much more effective and just for the good sake, it is much better to work together and not to stick on stereotypes and some regional conflicts, on some your personal dislikes and so on. And personally, I support the track of for international communication, more international communication, public diplomacy between countries. It's also one part of my job, and I have to create some projects between different countries. And I know it's a difficult job at all, because sometimes people do not want to listen to each other because they stick to some very particular interests and so on. But I really believe that the goodwill of any person and initiative even of one person can really change the situation, because people usually they tend to be friendly to each other. They usually tend to be open to find some new friends, to find some new experiences, to open new countries and so on. Even now, I can talk about that. Of course, there will be some restrictions. Maybe events in the close future will be with social distancing and, like, no handshakes and so on. But I really believe that we will come back to the personal communication, and maybe even this situation of lockdowns and being tired of, on the whole online will push us to be more open to each other and to cooperate much more. So I believe that it depends on just on any particular person, and you just should be more open for that. Do not be afraid, because I know sometimes even in my professional activity I have these fears that I won't be understood, like as person from another camp and so on. But sometimes it's more about your personal assessment, and some attempts, some enthusiastic tries really can change this situation.
Thank you. Mohammed Bure, please ask your question. Unmute yourself and you can ask the question directly to Victoria.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Louder, please. Louder.
all right. Okay. How about
Little
now?
louder.
Is it
Yes.
louder? Okay, that's all. This is Murshid from Sri Lanka. Well, this is my question is kind of context dependent. It might be varying from country to the other. Well, my the present addition is that what is indeed of your perception as to the emotionality management, or kind of the socio-emotional intelligence in the context of COVID period, as well as in the post COVID time as well. Now, for instance, if you do speak up now, in many of the countries, the people are very much isolated. They are self quarantined as well as non self quarantined to different places. That indeed would lead many of the ones into some form of frustration, especially the different age group members. As a result of which, what is indeed your corroboration as to those members in terms of your perception in regard to come off such mental complexities, as well as now the that phenomenon's applicability to educational system is very much cardinal as well, because now the as members or the learners are being very much physically very much away from their educational institution, and the programs are happening very much virtual, as well as other non-physical modes. As quite consequently, many of the ones are kind of frustrated as not being able to have access to very positive materials and positive information in regard of knowledge as well as educational progress, because not everybody is having equal access to internet as well. When we do take my country in Sri Lanka, we do have quite a difficulties in terms of enabling our students in order for to have very positive enhancement of their knowledge, especially in the context of the subject as well as elsewhere. Hence, it is indeed a time of negativity as well in times of emotional degradation, especially for learners. So that could applicable for others as well, not only the learners, so can be for other members of our population too. Now, on the whole, my question would be that what is indeed your the mental aspect in order to think over such a situation to positify that kind of contemplation? Is it clear?
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, thank you for the question. I see that the COVID-19 all over the world already have pushed some very deep and really difficult questions from the inside. It's a question about inequality. Even in the United States, we can see that there are some processes concerning some tension or the question of discrimination. It's questions of some misunderstanding, really some lack of access to education. For example, in Russia, it also was obvious when we had to make our education fully online for school children, for example. But in some rural areas, children do not have those capacities. Like they have one notebook, but three children cannot use it at one time, or this laptop is necessary for a job for the parents and so on. And such situations occurred in many spheres, of course, and people, especially in the beginning of pandemic, faced that they do not have access to to job. Especially a sensitive situation was for those who lost job, but they couldn't go anywhere and to look for that, only online. But not everybody can work online, especially old people. And also there was questions what to do with a great amount of people above 65 who were not allowed to go out the house, but who, for example, are main workers of museums, of schools as well as for different institutions, governmental, I mean public institutions. And pandemic really created many, I can say, good ground for some inequality at the same time, and some tension in the society. And it was a challenge, so not to create, to turn everything going on into social collapse at all. But the more creative, the more I could say operative the government is, and the whole society, civil society is, the easier to combat those problems. Because I can say, and really I think that those people are really very great workers, I mean volunteers, who engaged in the combating, who helped to deliver food to people who cannot go out, who delivered salaries as well for those who cannot get them on the card, but only by cash, for example, who helped with some medicals, with the transportation of people. It is important. It's not only the government job, but also the whole society. And what really now we have to reconsider, I guess, is this cooperation, communication between the civil society, the NGO sector, and the government as well. Because very often government does not see very small problems. It's like thinks about the whole strategy, but it doesn't see that this particular group of people needs help, and this small village needs help, for example. And people from NGO, they have more opportunities and time just to see such small issues and to cope with them. So it's a situation when both just common people from the street, I can say, of course, with some competencies and with some background, but and the government, who are officials, who have a lot of bureaucracy, very often they have to work together on that and to find those problems. Media can help as well to light up some situations in the country, yes, which are not very well developing. Because of course any country now will face it. I think it's the case also for well-developed countries, because, for example, what I saw about Spain, it's the problem of homeless people because of the pandemic, and people who just needed help in getting some food. And it's really it's a situation which appeared in many countries. So it's not normal, of course, as I cannot say it's normal, but it's widespread. And now is the time to think about the methods how to combat it together, both with government, volunteers, NGOs, and I think it's a good opportunity for that.
So much, Victoria, for this enlightened talk, because we actually came to know so many things from a very, very important country that we not able to understand that what is going on there, and from the horse mouth we now able to know that what is going on actually. And I think that is the main purpose of this creation of this platform and forum, that let's talk together, let's discuss that we don't know so many facts. Even sometimes we don't know so many things about China, and something we actually misinterpret, and with the preconceptions we try to interpret something that we actually don't know. So let's first know about the fact, then try to be judgmental to that particular facts and figures. So thank you so much. We are almost at the end of the discussions. We have some more minutes to left. Is If there is anyone would like to ask something to Victoria, they can ask, or else we can proceed for the conclusion remarks. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, if there is no questions,
I think there's no
anyway,
question.
yeah,
So
thank you
uh,
so much.
I think Jeff,
Yeah.
Jeff would uh, okay. Jeff would like to say, Jeff, he is from London, UK. Jeff would like to say that this has been a fascinating and frank presentation of information from Russia and former USSR countries. Thank you. So, yes, let's know about the facts, then we should comment over that. Otherwise, without knowing the facts and just to blind believe on the social media publications is not the right thing. So, maybe in upcoming days with the political analysis, Victoria is expert on that. So maybe we will have some more publication from Victoria, and that would be wonderful if you share with us. So definitely we will, more sharing is a knowledge sharing, and that is the power of the communication. Because I think we should use this pandemic, this lockdown, very fruitful way and a very positive way, just not in a very negative bias or something, but let's know the fact and comment after that. So thank you so much. And yes, we are mostly, what it's like to say, we are mostly affected by echo chamber effect. Yes, that's right, echo chamber. Yes, that's a useful word. Thank you so much, Dr. Bowman. Thank you so much, Victoria. And it's a really fascinating discussions, and came to know so many things about that. So good night to you, and take care and stay safe. And of course, enjoy today's Victory Day for Russia. So it's a very special day for you.
Yeah, thank you. Stay safe to everyone.
Yes. Bye bye,
Goodbye.
everybody.